When I first heard about this one, it immediately seemed interesting. But then the actual reviews came out, and they were pretty bad. And I was starting to wonder if it was even worth the time and the effort to review it. But I like Natalie Portman, and this is actually directed by Noah Hawley too, who is the creator and showrunner of the TV show Fargo, which I think is great. In fact, I would consider season 2 a genuine masterpiece. So that got me thinking that maybe the critics are dead wrong on this one. And I decided to give it a look anyway, because why not? And the story here is based on real events, and I kinda skimmed an article about it, just to see how much is actually real, because it does get a little bit out there toward the end. And well, the general idea here does seem to be sorta similar to what actually happened. But there is obviously a lot of creative license used here too. But some of the crazier stuff is apparently not that far from the truth. Anyway, the story here follows this astronaut, played by Natalie Portman, a woman who went to space and came back on one of the last shuttle flights. And after having that experience, she becomes a little bit disillusioned with regular everyday life, which obviously affects the people and things around her, and her own life too. And I gotta say, I liked Natalie's performance here quite a bit actually. I feel like with movies like this and Vox Lux, she's finally starting to push herself a bit more, to find projects that are more interesting, because for a while there, well, I feel like she got a bit comfortable playing sorta unchallenging roles. But she's doing something different now, and I for one really appreciate it, and I hope she keeps doing it. Now, when it comes to the story itself, well, at first I wasn't really into it. But pretty soon it started growing on me, and about an hour in, I was pretty much loving it. Which had a lot to do with the filmmaking, because it's not exactly your standard affair either. First of all, I wanted to mention that I really like the soundtrack in this. But the other thing you'll immediately notice is the way it plays around with aspect ratio. It goes from ultra widescreen to 4:3 to widescreen to one of the widest shots I've ever seen. And sometimes it does that several times in a single scene too. And I gotta admit, at first I found it to be a bit distracting. It felt gimmicky, it felt like they were doing it just for the sake of doing it. And the movie was obviously shot in widescreen too, which gave them the ability to play around with the framing in post. But then I figured out what they were doing with it, and I started liking it. You see, I'm pretty sure the aspect ratio sort of represents the main character's state of mind. Her view on things, her emotional state. When she's anxious or happy, she feels caged in and the image shrinks. But when she's feeling good and she's in a great place, it goes wide. And with that context, I thought it was actually pretty clever, and I really started liking it. And it's really that sort of creative thinking I've come to expect from the creator of Fargo too. Because you see a lot of that kind of out-of-box thinking in that show. And that's absolutely one of the reasons I'm really glad I ended up watching this. However, when we get to the second half of the movie here, I have to say it started to lose me a little bit, and it wasn't just the story. Although that was the biggest reason, but it was also the character. I wasn't a huge fan of where they went with it. I don't know, it just didn't feel that compelling for some reason. And I also noticed that the creative editing and whatnot also started to dry up a little bit in the second half. Don't get me wrong, there is still some really great stuff in that part too. But overall, I just didn't enjoy the second half nearly as much as the first half. And that was a real shame, because at one point I was genuinely loving this movie. But I do understand now why this has been rather poorly reviewed. At least to some extent, although I definitely don't think it's anywhere near as bad as the reviews make it out to be. And there are some really fun and creative things this movie does, which does make it interesting and unique, and I would even call that first half funny and sort of endearing. After which it of course goes off the rails in more ways than one. And it turns almost more tragic and sad than anything else really. But yeah, this one is definitely a mixed bag, and I have some mixed feelings about it. But I don't regret watching it, and I did appreciate it on a creative level too. So how about it? Would I recommend it? Well, maybe, but not really. It's really an individual judgment call, this one. If it sounds interesting, maybe give it a chance. And if it doesn't, it's probably fairly safe to skip. Or don't. After all, I'm not your dad. But hey, what are your thoughts on this? Have you seen it? Did you like it? Let me know. And if you enjoyed the video, maybe give it a thumbs up or sub to the channel, because that would be fantastic. And if you'd like, you can also support me on Patreon or PayPal through the links in the description. And as always, I appreciate you, and thanks for watching.